Gaming on integrated graphics is finally getting interesting. Intel just launched their new Lunar Lake processors, while AMD recently launched their new Strix Point processors. But are the integrated graphics actually any good for 1080p gaming? I've compared both, as well as Intel's last-gen Meteor Lake, in 20 different games to find out what they can do. I'm using ASUS's new ZenBook S14 laptop for testing Intel's latest Lunar Lake processor, and ASUS's Zephyrus G16 gaming laptops for testing AMD's Strix Point and Intel's Meteor Lake. Now, this doesn't sound fair as there is a size difference, but I've used ASUS's Armoury Crate software to limit the CPUs in the G16s to 28 watts, which matches the ZenBook's highest performance mode, and the G16s were tested with Eco Mode enabled, which disables the NVIDIA discrete graphics, ensuring only the integrated graphics are available. Alright, here's what we're looking at in terms of spec differences between these processors. Lunar Lake has the fastest memory, but it's got the lowest amount of cores and threads, as it's designed for thinner and lighter laptops that don't need heavy multi-core performance. But there are definitely similar laptops with Meteor Lake and Strix Point processors. It's just that I only happen to have them in these bigger 16-inch models. Just for some context, here's how performance looks in Cinebench with all processors power limited to 28 watts. Intel's new Lunar Lake has the highest single-core score, but at the end of the day, fewer cores and threads means less multi-core performance. We're also going to check out AMD's new Fluid Motion Frames 2 feature, also known as AFMF 2, which is basically frame generation, but handled at the driver level. And this means that the AMD laptop can apply frame generation to basically any game. The game doesn't have to have support for frame generation. Now, you can argue about fake frames all you want, but the fact is, this feature does make gameplay smoother, which is definitely something that's kind of important when it comes to gaming on lower powered integrated graphics. It does add more latency, so you probably don't want to use it in every single game, like Counter-Strike for example. But by default, turning AFMF2 on does enable AMD's anti-lag feature, which should help with that a little bit. When I've used AFMF2, I've set search mode to standard and performance mode to performance, which is what AMD recommends for lower powered integrated graphics. Alright, enough explanation. Let's see how these three iGPUs perform in 20 different games. Let's start out with Cyberpunk 2077. I've got the native results up the top, which just means no upscaling applied, and I've also tested with upscaling below. In this test, AMD was 14% faster compared to Lunar Lake, while Lunar Lake was 30% faster compared to their last-gen Meteor Lake. It won't be fair to compare most of the upscaled results in games, because we've prioritized using FSR for AMD and XeSS for Intel. As Tim from Hardware Unboxed suggested, this will better represent what most gamers use. So these numbers are only useful for getting an idea of what sort of performance is possible with upscaling. FPS appears to increase significantly with AFMF2 enabled. But again, this is frame generation, so the increase isn't from real frames from the game. They're extra generated frames. I just don't have a better way of showing the improvement. Black Myth Wukong forces and only works with upscaling on, presumably as it's a GPU heavy game. So I've used XeSS on all laptops so that we can fairly compare it. Unfortunately, this game didn't load past compiling shaders with AMD's preview driver that has AFMF2 support. I reported the issue to AMD and they say it will be fixed in future, but I had to use a slightly older driver on AMD for just this game so that it would open. Despite that, AMD was the best here, while Intel's Lunar Lake was slightly behind their older Meteor Lake in terms of average FPS. But Lunar Lake still felt more stable due to less stuttering, as shown by its higher 1% low. A Plague Tale Requiem was also a little better on Intel's older Meteor Lake. This only happened in a few games, so I've got to assume that some games simply prefer the higher core and thread count of Meteor Lake compared to the extra GPU power and higher single-core performance of Lunar Lake. This game doesn't have FSR or XeSS upscaling, only DLSS. But this is where AFMF2 shines. It doesn't care. You can still make use of frame generation to improve the smoothness of the gameplay. Hogwarts Legacy had the biggest improvement for Intel's new Lunar Lake over their last-gen Meteor Meteor Lake out of all 20 games tested, with Lunar Lake reaching a 67% higher average frame rate, though the 1% lows weren't much different. AMD ran better here, though not by much, and all three laptops ran much better with upscaling enabled. Red Dead Redemption 2 was almost the same on AMD's Strix Point and Intel's Lunar Lake, though AMD had a bit more of an FPS boost once we turn on FSR with performance mode. Unfortunately, I couldn't test AFMF 2 here, as we use the game's built-in benchmark, and that cuts between multiple scenes. Not ideal for running frame capture software, but yeah, that is still available if you want frame generation on the AMD laptop. The Witcher 3 is an older game, but we need to talk about it, because for some reason, AMD actually ended up worse than both Intel laptops here. I retested it after completely resetting Windows, but got the same result. For whatever reason, this game just doesn't run as well on AMD's Strix Point integrated graphics, though it was much better with FSR set to performance mode. And of course, you've also got AFMF2 for a further boost. AMD suggests only using AFMF2 once you've got the FPS to 50 for a good experience, which was possible from FSR. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is another older title, but again, Lunar Lake had a clear win here. This game doesn't have FSR, so I had to use XeSS on all laptops, meaning it's possible to fairly compare the upscaled results in this one, and Intel wins there too. AFMF2 wasn't tested here for the same reason as Red Dead Redemption 2. Spiderman is another game where Intel's Lunar Lake was beating AMD, at least in average FPS, as AMD was a little ahead in terms of 1% lows. This game doesn't have XeSS, so we used FSR3 on the Intel laptops too. So again, it is possible to compare upscaling here. With FSR on performance mode, the AMD laptop was ahead, but honestly, the fact that this game is running okay at near 60 FPS on high settings on the 14-inch Lunar Lake laptop without upscaling is quite impressive. Starfield performed best on the AMD laptop, but it's only like 4 FPS higher than Lunar Lake. Upscaling is comparable here too, so we can get an FPS boost on all laptops. AMD was still in the lead, but the gap closes to just a 2 FPS difference. Ghost of Tsushima was weird. AMD performed the best without upscaling, and performance improves with FSR. Great. But AFMF2 actually performed worse here. Yeah, the average FPS looks better, but it doesn't matter, because the game had more stuttering now, as shown by the lower 1% low. This is the only game where this happened, so I'm guessing it's a bug, and I've reported it to AMD. Instead of individually talking through the rest of the 10 games tested, I'll just quickly skip through the results so that we can move on. But feel free to pause the video if you want a closer look at any specific game. It's important to test a wide selection of games so we can get an accurate picture of the average performance differences to make a fairer conclusion. Like I always say, more data equals more better. But yeah, in most of these cases, there's nothing special that we haven't already seen. On average, over all 20 games tested, at 1080p, Intel's newer Lunar Lake processor was 26% faster compared to their last-gen Meteor Lake processor. That's a pretty good gen-on-gen improvement in just 9 months. Strangely, some of the games were a little faster on the older Meteor Lake laptop. I double-checked these and replicated the results, so I'm not sure what the deal is. Perhaps these games simply prefer the higher core and thread count of the older Meteor Lake chip, or maybe the drivers for Lunar Lake could use some further optimization. But what about AMD? Here's how much faster AMD's latest Strix Point processor was in gaming compared to Intel's Lunar Lake at 1080p. AMD was 11% faster out of this selection of games, with a few titles performing better on Intel. It would seem that either Intel better optimizes for these games, or perhaps the faster memory used by Lunar Lake is giving it an edge there. I've seen a lot of people reporting that Lunar Lake is superior in terms of integrated graphics simply because it wins in 3D Mark Time Spy. And while I could replicate that, this difference just doesn't fully translate into better gaming performance, at least at 28 watts. Here's how much power all laptops were drawing from the wall in Cyberpunk 2077. AMD's Strix Point was using the most power, but it also performed the best, while Lunar Lake was using significantly less than the others. Of course, this isn't an ideal comparison, as I've got different laptops, but even so, AMD was reaching a 15% higher average FPS in this game. Granted, that's only like 4 FPS, but regardless, this means Intel's newer Lunar Lunar Lake wins from a performance per watt perspective. An impressive result, considering how much further ahead it is compared to Meteor Lake. Should be a nice improvement for MSI's Claw. But what about the price difference? Prices change all the time, so check the links below the video for updates and to see if there are current sales on any of these laptops. And if you are looking for a gaming laptop, then check out our gaminglaptop.deals website with that link below. We update it every day to include all of the latest sales, so make sure that you check it out regularly to save money on your next gaming laptop. Generally speaking, laptops with Intel's newer Lunar Lake processors have the highest starting price, but they are also the newest. And to be fair, the Meteor Lake options aren't that different, outside of the cheapest VivoBook. Despite Meteor Lake being 9 months old now, AMD has some lower priced options, but at the end of the day, you're looking at a starting range of $1,100 to $1,400 US for laptops with these processors. If we take the cheapest price these laptop processors are currently available for, then AMD wins in terms of cost per frame value. And apparently all three of these laptops can run the processor with at least 28 watts of power like I've tested here. Based on my testing, if you're gaming on integrated graphics at 28 watts, then AMD's latest Strix Point iGPU does the best at 1080p, and access to features like AFMF2 is just icing on the cake. But that said, Intel's newer Lunar Lake certainly offers a nice gen-on-gen improvement compared to last year's Meteor Lake, especially when you consider that I've got Lunar Lake running in a smaller 14-inch laptop. The fact that you can run games at 1080p on integrated graphics is impressive in itself. Granted, in many of the heavier titles, you will need to make use of upscaling features like XeSS or FSR, but still, there were a handful of games that didn't need those features and could still run with decent setting levels. Of course, it might be a different story when running these iGPUs at lower power levels, which is what we'll see in smaller laptops or even handheld gaming consoles, like MSI's Claw or Asus's Ally. Unfortunately, 28 watts is as low as I could drop the power limit on the G16s. So check out this video by The Fox next to find out how these iGPUs perform at 25, 17, 15, and even 12 watts. Or if you want more details on Lunar Lake, like how it compares against Apple and Qualcomm, then check out this review by Just Josh. I'll see you in one of those videos next.